We often get asked by both students and parents here at BIPD whether or not a minor can go to jail for the possession of drugs or alcohol. And I think it's important to distinguish between jail and juvenile detention. So anytime we're talking about juveniles, we're talking about potentially being taken or transported to a juvenile detention center. Juvenile detention is much more centered around rehabilitation and restoration, children and youth learning from their mistakes through maybe treatment or through things like community service. So when we're talking about juveniles, that's really the lens I want to focus on. In terms of possession of drugs or alcohol, typically what we see is that youth are getting into trouble more for their behaviors associated with drinking or using substances, things like shoplifting, drunk driving, sometimes domestic violence situations where their inhibitions are lowered because they're under the influence. And so we more often see youth ending up with consequences because of the behaviors associated with their use rather than just simple possession or consumption of drugs or alcohol. So a really important law for youth to understand, especially youth getting ready to head off to college, is the Good Samaritan law. It's actually a cluster of laws, but the one that's really important for teenagers to understand is that there is protection for an individual if they call 911 in order to help assist getting somebody emergency medical care. And so for this law, it means that if a youth or really actually anybody is in a situation where an individual needs emergency medical care, especially for something like an overdose or they're intoxicated to a level where they need emergency medical assistance, if they call 911, they're protected from prosecution, meaning that if they're also under the influence of an illicit substance or they're in possession of alcohol and they're under the age of 21, they won't be prosecuted or given legal consequences for that situation. And it also protects the individual who needs that emergency medical care. Youth often are concerned about calling 911 because their friend who's intoxicated, they don't want them to get in trouble. But the Good Samaritan law protects them in that situation, meaning that we're really focused on them getting emergency medical care rather than a punitive process. The important thing for youth to note, though, is that we do expect them to stay on the phone with 911 dispatch. They're going to ask some really important questions about what the situation is, where people are located. It's really important for teenagers to understand that when they make a 911 call for any reason, but especially for the Good Samaritan law reasons, that being able to answer the dispatcher's questions really impacts how quickly we can provide the support that that individual needs. And so it's really important for them to stay on the phone, wait for emergency responders to arrive, so that we can ensure that we're getting that person the care that they need. So in the state of Washington, there's often a lot of confusion for youth about the legality of substances. Which drugs are legal, which drugs are illegal. Laws around substances are ever changing. So it's really important for youth to kind of get a good understanding that for them, if they're under the age of 21, the general rule of thumb is that most things are illegal for them. If you can purchase it at a convenience store or at a supermarket without showing ID, obviously those things are legal, like Advil, aspirin, NyQuil, that kind of thing. But if you are purchasing it through somebody on the street, buying it from a friend, most likely that is illegal for you to be in possession or in consumption of. It's also important for youth to understand that the laws around tobacco and nicotine have changed in the state of Washington. Previously, it was at 18, you could legally purchase nicotine products from a store. That law has recently changed to 21. What I often see and get a lot of questions on from youth are things around prescription medications, whether or not that individual had a prescription for say, having their wisdom teeth out, whether they can use the remaining of those prescription medications later on for a different thing. And technically that is illegal. So using a prescription medication for a purpose that was not the original intention of that prescription is a violation of the law. And so we often see youth sharing prescriptions, say their friend has a prescription for Adderall, they have a prescription for Adderall, but they forgot it today. Can I just use one of my friends and we'll swap next week? And the answer to that is no. And there's some really important reasons for that. Prescription medications are really designed for the individual in which they were prescribed. Doctors spend a lot of time going over medical history, taking into account things like weight, height, metabolism, in order to determine the right prescription dose for an individual. And so they're not designed to be, kind of shared between individuals, even if they're the same medication. And so it's really important for youth to understand that for prescription medication, if it is not your prescription and you are not using it based on the intent at which the doctor prescribed it, that is a violation of the law. So there are many different reasons that an individual should call 911, and it's a hard thing to ask a youth to do because it is scary. But particularly for a youth or a juvenile, the number one reason that I would say it's important to call 911 is if somebody is in need of emergency medical care. That is where we often see youth as the sole support in a situation where a friend is going through some kind of crisis or overdose, and the only person around them is a juvenile. And so learning the process of calling 911 and being comfortable doing that is a really important skill to have because it could save somebody's life. Oftentimes I think youth underestimate how many times they are going to be the individual who could provide that first level of support. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes when somebody is under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they might start saying things that aren't necessarily what they would say in a normal circumstance, particularly around suicidality. We see a lot of youth really first open up about their self-harming or their thoughts of suicide when they're under the influence, and it's usually to another youth that they open up and talk about those thoughts too. And so it's really important for juveniles to know that 911 is a resource, whether that's through my position here with the police department to help connect individuals to resources and services, or really our officers to help assess whether or not somebody is in imminent risk of hurting themselves or hurting others. 911 really is here to help provide support. And so it's really important for youth to know that it's okay to call 911 and that there are support and resources available to them when they do. It isn't just a punitive process. So if a parent is looking for support or resources or needs, somebody to talk to about their use, substance use, they're always welcome to come into the police department. That's actually a way that people often connect with me. I'm happy to always sit down with a parent and go over, kind of what things they should be looking for in terms of, warning signs or concerns around a juvenile's substance use, and then what resources are available. I think parents often feel very isolated when it comes to asking for help for their youth, and it's really important to know that that is actually a really common question that we get here. Many parents reach out just to get a better understanding of what does youth substance use look like on Bainbridge Island and what is available for educational services or treatment and support. And they often come to law enforcement or to me as the community health navigator to ask those questions and get directed into different avenues of support and help.
So if a minor is caught by an officer in possession of drugs or alcohol, they will be sent to they'll be sent to juvenile detention, not jail, because the jail is housed for adults and minors and adults can't be housed together, or they can receive a summons or a citation. The idea of the citation is not necessarily a bad thing. What that does is that can help us or the courts direct them towards any kind of troubles they might be having with substance abuse. So the Good Samaritan law is designed to help the person who's actually in need of emergency services, any life-threatening type services like that. So I like to use a party as an example. Say the kids are at a party and one of their friends or somebody they don't know has some possibly life-threatening issues going on, overdose on drugs or alcohol. It gives them the opportunity to call 911, have us and aid respond without feeling any repercussions for their actions. What they're doing is a good thing. The safety and concern of the person that's there now is our same concern. It becomes a life threatening type treatment that we're giving them or to prevent something worse from happening. So drugs that are legal and illegal, I kind of look at the way of presenting an ID. So you have to go to you can't go into a marijuana shop without being over the age of 21, and you're required to show an ID. Same when you go to get a prescription at a pharmacy, you have to have an ID to get that prescription. Some over-the-counter medicines like cough syrup require an ID. Then you have illicit drugs which are completely illegal. You got like your fentanyl, your methamphetamine, your cocaine, heroin. Those are stuff which are schedules according to the DEA. So those are all illegal. So a good reason to call 911. When your friends are taking these drugs and alcohol, you kind of lose your inhibitions. So that means you're doing things that you normally would not do. Driving under the influence, domestics, angers can turn into domestic violence, or even sexual encounters. So we kind of lose our inhibitions, and then all of a sudden we're caught up in doing something like this. Calling on a friend for driving under the influence is not a bad thing, because potentially you're saving their lives. And then I go back to the substance abuse thing, where this could be an open door where we finally get them directed towards any help that they need. I've actually had parents call the police department on their child. They saw there was a problem and they wanted some intervention with it. I've even come to the point where we've had a parent ask us to cite their child for marijuana use because they wanted some intervention. If a parent wants to come talk to us, they are more than welcome to. Another person who I would direct them towards is Kelsey Lynch, our community health navigator. She has some resources that she could direct the parents to, and she's really good at her job, and we really appreciate it.